So let me tell you a little bit about my journey when I knew I was going to pursue being a doctor. And so when I was a teenager, I was really close to my grandmother. And I watched her be diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And for years, I just kind of watched her decline quite a bit. She used to be the matriarch of our family. Saturday family dinners were there. I'd gather there with aunts and uncles and cousins, my sister, my parents. And we just have dinner and kind of enjoyed just being together. And as soon as she was diagnosed, it was like all of that ended. She could no longer live where she was living. We had to move her across the street from our house so we could check in on her all the time. I watched moments where she didn't recognize her children anymore. And then it became really painful for me where she didn't even know who I was. And there was that part of me that thought to myself, as devastating as this is, it's incredible when the brain works the way that it's supposed to. And then I also had a cousin who had epilepsy as a child, and she eventually grew out of it. And again, while something like dementia, which Alzheimer's is a type of dementia, or epilepsy or seizures, even though that's devastating for the person, devastating for the family to witness, just when you think about the brain and when it's working right, it's incredible. And that's when I knew I wanted to be a doctor. That's when I knew that I wanted to work in neurology. That's when I knew that I really wanted to impact the lives of people who were suffering from neurological illnesses. So if you want to know how long into my journey as a neurologist that I decided that everything I had learned, everything that I was learning on my own, the impact that I was having on patients' lives, how I just wanted to take that and sort of transition it and send it out to the masses. Yeah, I was probably 5 or 6 years into being an attending. So I underwent 4 years of training as a neurologist. I underwent another year to further specialize in epilepsy and treat people with seizure disorders. And then after that, 5 or 6 years kind of working in private practice. And the incredible thing about that was I realized that I was having the biggest impact on people's lives, not when I was prescribing them medications. It wasn't when I was taking them to the operating room to take out that piece of their brain that was potentially triggering their seizures. It was really when I was getting them to understand how their brain works. It was when I was getting them to understand whatever struggles that they were dealing with that were potentially contributing to their medical or neurological issues. It was when I was getting them to understand these medical and neurological illness and then showing them changes that they can make every day to alleviate their struggles, whatever that looked like, whether it was the physical illness, the neurological illness, the mental illness, the stresses, and then to see the profound impact that that had on their health, their life, their families' lives. That's when I was kind of like, oh man, I need to shift. I cannot let insurance companies dictate how much time I spend with patients, 15, 20 minutes, and I need to take my message to the masses. Yeah, so if you want to know a couple of stories of people that I've worked with where I really sort of had an impact and was able to help them shift their lives, and where I was kind of like, man, people need to know how their brain works so that they can do this for themselves. Here are some stories, right? I'll first start with a police officer that I took care of. And for all the ish that cops get, the reality is that they see people at their worst. They deal with the worst of people every single day. And that takes a toll on them. That's incredibly stressful. It takes a toll on them, takes a toll on their families. And so this cop in particular, after everything he had witnessed, that took a significant psychological toll on him that manifested itself in neurological symptoms. And so he was referred to me because he was having what people thought were seizures. And so when somebody has a seizure, there's like a burst of electrical activity that happens in the brain, almost like a short circuit. And when I started to test him, I didn't see any burst of electrical activity in the brain. He had a normal brain. It looked good. It performed well from a electricity sort of standpoint. And when I witnessed the episodes, I knew that this wasn't necessarily a brain issue, but more of a stress issue. And so we sort of delved into some of the stressors that he was facing, both professionally and personally. Got him to start understanding that. And his symptoms started to get better, but they were still happening. And they were still happening because he was still a police officer. So he was still seeing people at their worst. He was being triggered by things in his environment. And so when I asked him, well, what is it that you, like, let's take money out of the equation. What is it that you really want to do for yourself? And he told me what his dreams were. And so then, knowing what I know about the brain, we started working towards his dreams. He eventually left the police force. He created his own business, really successful business. His relationship with his family got better. His relationship with his wife was better. Relationship with his children were better. But most importantly, the relationship that he had with himself was better. And the symptoms that he had essentially went away. And that's the kind of thing that I want to do for people. Show them that a lot of times, the power to really change their lives lies within themselves. We've got the most powerful technological tool at our disposal, and it lies within our skull, and it weighs 3 pounds, and it's called the brain. And as long as you figure out how to take charge of your brain, first how to survive your brain, and then how to take charge of your brain, that's when you can create the life that you want for yourself. So the other story, you know how sometimes people feel stuck?
Yeah.
Right? You can feel stuck mentally. You can feel stuck physically. So I'm going to tell you a story about a patient who kind of was stuck in a really sort of unusual way. So there's a patient that I had taken care of before. And so I knew this patient really, really well. And so one day, my secretaries call me, and let's say, well, we'll use we'll use the name Chris, right? So they say, hey, Chris is in the office, and he's in a wheelchair. And I'm like, why is he in a wheelchair? Like, Chris walks like anybody else. They're like, I don't know. He's saying he's paralyzed. He cannot walk. I was like, okay, wheel him back to one of the exam rooms, and I'll come see Chris. So I go in to see Chris, and Chris says to me, Doc, I don't know what's going on. For the last couple of days, I cannot walk. I'm like, what do you mean you can't walk? He's like, I don't know. I can't walk. He's like, I can walk side to side, but I cannot walk forward and back. So I was like, Chris, what do you mean you can walk side to side, but not forward and back? I was like, show me. So Chris now shows me. Chris gets up out of the wheelchair, right? And if you think the wheelchair has sort of those foot holders, he steps over the foot holder and he starts walking side to side, just kind of like side shuffles, back and forth, back and forth. And I said, okay, Chris, now walk forward and back. He's like, I can't. I was like, try. And he's like stuck. And I said, okay, Chris, I know what I'm going to do for you. I picked up Chris's left leg, and I threw it out in front. And he caught himself like this. And I was like, Chris, did you just see what I did for you? He's like, yeah. Take the right leg, throw it out in front. And he went, oh. And I said, okay, now left leg. And he went, oh. He went, oh. He's like, oh my God, I can walk. And he walked out of the office. My secretaries came back and they were like, Dr. Douyon, what did you do? Like, he came in paralyzed. He left walking fine, no wheelchair. And sometimes our brain's way of trying to protect us, we can be stuck. We can be stuck mentally. We can be stuck physically. And your brain is designed for movement in every way. It's not designed to keep you stuck. It's only when you feel unsafe. He was now in a safe setting with me, and I forced him to take action, even though I did it for him. Passive action, showing him, and then he took active action. And a lot of times when we're stuck, isn't that what we need to do? We need to challenge our brains to now take action. So I decided to write the book, Neuroplasticity, Your Brain's Superpower, because I was inspired. And I was inspired by 2 things. First, I was inspired by my patients. And here's what, I was inspired by those patients who sort of decided that they weren't going to let a diagnosis beat them, that they weren't going to strongly identify with whatever label the medical system had given them. And so now they started doing what they needed to do to change and evolve. And I knew that that change agent, that change engine was their brains. The reality is that our brains are constantly changing. They're constantly evolving. We used to think that our brains were kind of static, and the only time that they would change would be as if we got old and things started to break down and degenerate, or if we had some kind of injury to the brain, like a trauma to the brain or a stroke. We now know that's not the case at all. Our brains are constantly changing every moment of the day. They change with every thought we have, every conversation we engage in, and every behavior that we take part in. And I had patients that were doing just extraordinary things to change their life and to change their health. And so I was inspired by them. And I don't know if you've ever had sort of this situation happen in life, but all of a sudden you're inspired and you have the energy to now kind of do this thing that you're setting out to do. And it's just kind of flowing from you. And for me, it was almost like God touched me and God was like, all right, go ahead. That's what it felt like. And I just started writing. And I got it out within like a couple of months. So neuroplasticity, your brain's superpower, for me, it is like an ode to my patients. It is an inspiration from them and from God. And it's me sharing with the world how your brain is constantly changing, but you are in charge of its evolution. And if your brain is constantly changing, what's so incredible about that is that it means that you're capable of changing. Your communities are capable of changing. Society is capable of changing. The world is. And you're capable of just changing your life and creating the life that you want for yourself. And so here is why I set out to do this podcast, the Surviving Your Brain podcast. Because I see people every day living in fear and living with limited beliefs. And to me, that is the brain sort of in charge of their life. That is the brain taking control. And it happens to all of us. There are moments that I've lived in fear. So for example, I tell the story often that I was diagnosed with kidney failure when I was 18. I had my first transplant at 28 years old, 8 days after graduating from medical school. My biggest fear had always been dialysis. And somehow between 18 and 28, I avoided dialysis. And at 28, I was lucky. My father was my kidney donor. He donated a kidney to me. And I know a lot of you guys are thinking, well, how's his dad doing now? About 3 to 4 days after the kidney transplant, my dad was up and dancing. Him and my mom are big into Argentinian tango. So he was up and he's been doing great ever since. And that was now 16 years ago. And as my career sort of continued along and sort of life went on, the initial disease process started to come back. And then I got COVID, and that wiped out the rest of my kidney function. And I remember when I was in the ER, sick, and they had just told me I had COVID. And at that time, the news, they kept like a running tally of the people that were getting COVID and the people that were dying, right? And I was like, oh, crap, I'm immunocompromised. This is not going to be good for me. They wheeled me to this isolation area to keep me away from everybody. No doctors, no nurses, just leave me alone in this isolation area with my thoughts and thinking about these COVID numbers. And then the doctor that was covering for my doctor came in, and she said to me, you need dialysis, and you need it immediately. And to me, that was worse news than COVID. That had been the thing that I feared my entire freaking life. And the reason why I feared that was because the people that I had seen in the hospital, in the dialysis centers doing dialysis, looked like they were at death's door. They looked like they were waiting to die. And they looked like they had resigned themselves to that. And I didn't want that to be me. I was like, I'm too young. I've got a lot of living left. There's a lot that I want to do. I've got these 2 amazing little boys that I want to be there for. And so after she told me that, and she kind of walked out the room, and I was left alone, I let myself feel those emotions. Like I cried, and not some like crying where you just have some little tears coming out. Like I bawled, like an ugly cry, right? And I let myself do that for a couple of hours. And then I had a decision to make. Was I going to do dialysis the way that I saw other people do dialysis, or was I going to do it my own way? And by the time they had tunneled this catheter into my chest, as the access site for dialysis, I already had a plan in place. I already knew what I had to do, right? I had to be physically healthy, so I had to continue working out. I had to be mentally healthy, so I had to get my mind right, right? I had to focus on something bigger than myself. Because a lot of people that I see who are struggling with their health or life, their focus is all on them. And yet when we focus on other people, that's when our lives really get better. So I had to not focus just on me, but focus on others. So I worked during dialysis. I took interviews during dialysis, took meetings while doing dialysis. I had a local news agency following me around. It helped me break through the fear that I had and the limiting beliefs that I had during dialysis. And I was able to do that because I know how the brain works. And I want to be able to share that with people, help them survive their brains, break through the fears and limiting beliefs that they have, so that way they can accomplish the health, the business, and the lives that they want for themselves. So here's my hope for you through the Surviving Your Brain podcast. It's that in a world where so many people feel disempowered, that you gain your power. That you realize that you don't always have to look to the external for answers. That the answers often lie within you. It's about you becoming the leader that your brain needs to be in order for you to accomplish the health and the business and the life that you want for yourself. I often say that the brain is like a 2-year-old child. The brain is beautifully complex, but it is like a 2-year-old child. It is powerful, but again, it is like a 2-year-old child that will throw a tantrum at the drop of a hat, being triggered by things that you are not even aware of. But if you can take this brain that is so incredibly powerful, be the leader that it needs, take charge of this brain, then you can transform your life for the better. And so that's what I want for you with this podcast. And I'm really excited because I've got some incredible guests lined up for you. I've got a reverend that we're going to talk about trauma and contemplative practice. I've got a good friend of mine who we constantly have these amazing conversations about the brain and life and how the brain's related to what you're going on in your life. I've got an expert in sleep, a sleep neurologist, a doctor who talks about the importance of sleep and the negative impact that lack of sleep has on us physically, but also neurologically. I've got a CEO and founder of a company that is offering the latest diagnostic in Alzheimer's disease, and we're going to get into a really great conversation about dementia. I've got a good friend of mine who's a day trader, and we're going to talk about money and the brain. Oh, what, you didn't think money issues are related to the brain? Oh, it definitely is. Anything that has to do with money is a brain issue. In fact, some people would say lack of money is a brain disorder. Right? So we're going to delve into that. We're going to talk about the importance of time. I've got a time management expert coming to help you manage your time better. Time is such an asset, and it's the one thing that we can't get back. So I'm looking forward to doing this journey with you, and make no mistake of it, we're on this journey together. You're going to learn a lot, but I'm going to learn a lot too. And I look forward to seeing you in the Surviving Your Brain podcast.